At 9 o'clock, so we're a little late starting, but here we go. And I trust that all this will come on in just a second. So I've been restating Christianity as a result of deconstructing what I consider to be a toxic religious narrative based in fear, there you go, that was given me when I was a kid. And so becoming an Episcopalian was a big sign of that process. However, it's ongoing. I became an Episcopalian long ago, and then around the time of Henry VIII, and then I have still been working at it, and I was ordained a priest, and still at this process of reconstructing a Christianity that for me is based in love, not fear. And a second huge part of it is to base it in the idea of oneness rather than separateness. And then there's a third part, and last week we talked about this, but to dismantle all of the racism and anti-science and misogyny and all that kind of stuff that was in it too. So I am very, very eager to send these PowerPoint slides to anybody who's interested. If you will critique them for me, because I want to put all this into a book one day called, the working title is Holy Atheist, because I had to get to a point where I declared my atheism about the God of fear and the God of rewards and punishments, so that I could embrace the God of love, the religion of love, the life of love, and the life of Jesus. And I think something's going to have to happen on that, unless all of a sudden I have a case of dyslexia. It's been a screwy day. So here we go. And I'm going to read the stuff backwards because I don't want to stop until all of that is right. So today we're going to talk about oneness versus separateness. And what we're going to do is start with Dr. King. Now, I, in the 9 o'clock service, quoted a really very important statement about him, and this simply bows to the fact that I began reading Dr. Martin Luther King and Thomas Merton, learning about, and then also we're talking about the One Tree Forest Pando, and that's given me a kind of a passion, an organizing passion for my work and life. Come on in, my friend. And then I am, oh, you okay? Good deal. Sorry about that. So these two brothers, King and Merton, had at the center of their writings that the universe is constructed as an interdependent whole. And we'll get to that very famous quote of Thomas Merton's later on, "We are one, though we imagine that we're not." So, Dr. King said, "We are caught in a network of mutuality, and justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And this is an amazing sentence. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And then for him to say, this is the interrelated structure of all of reality. Now, he didn't say that because he was a scientist. He didn't say it was because he's a physicist. He said it was because he was a mystic. And mystics oftentimes get to the same truth that scientists get to, particularly when it gets to what's called unitive thinking. And that's what another kind of fancy way of talking about what we're talking about today is unitive thinking, or oneness over separateness. Now, we'll pass on that. Brother Thomas Merton, I read when I left law school. And those of you who were here last week heard the story about my leaving law school. Richard Hines, my brother, was sitting in the same UCC class that I got up and left, and he stayed. He's an attorney, member of St.Luke's, and I am a priest, interim rector of St. Luke's. Isn't that the way God interweaves our lives? I just love it. Anyway, Merton said that all of this stuff is about love. Love's driving it all. Love is the energy, and actually love is our true self. Our false self is fear. Our true self is oneness. Our false self is separateness. So if you ever forget somebody's name, just call them love, because that's the real name. Now, Before he was killed in December 10, 1968, same year Dr. King was assassinated, Merton was in Bangkok, Thailand. He gave a presentation to a bunch of Eastern and Western monastics. And he said, "We are one, but we imagine that we're not." And if somebody tells you that they are not one with refugees or sisters and brothers who are homeless or who are poor, who are of a different skin color, who are different sexual orientation, different gender, if they tell you they're not one, they are caught in a delusion. They're imagining that they're not. And he says what we have to recover is our original unity. What we have to be is what we are. Now, I think that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the gospel I'm preaching. That's the gospel I live for. That's the gospel I would die for, is that we have to recover who we are. We're already one. Now, this coincides with that wonderful Zulu notion of Ubuntu. You ask, there's a wonderful little slim volume published many years ago by Leah Tutu, Archbishop Tutu's wife, and one of their daughters. And they say they would go to church, and within 4 minutes of the Archbishop starting a sermon, they would turn to one another and say, "Sermon number 4. Sermon number 5. And then he said, "Well, I only have one sermon." It's the sermon of Ubuntu, which is a Zulu term meaning that it takes, we are persons through other persons. Or I am because we are. Or you can't be a Christian alone, you can't be a human being alone. And here comes Charles Eisenstein, this young philosopher who's living in Asheville, I think great public intellectual, and he says, our culture says that you're a discrete, separate being, a bubble of psychology inside a robot of flesh, among other discrete, separate beings. That's why more for me is less for you in that thinking, when you're in that consciousness. Biology says you're the expression of your DNA that drives you to maximize reproductive self-interest. Economics says that, again, you are an economic actor seeking to maximize financial self-interest. Religion says you are a soul encased in flesh, separate from all the other souls encased in flesh. That's the myth of the separate self. And that kind of ideology will wound you. He says, we in America live by the religion of the separate self. And that is why so many of us are wounded. We don't understand that I and you are one. I belong to you, you belong to me, we belong to one another, and in fact we are one. So he says, you can't be enlightened alone. He says, one of my favorite sayings is enlightenment is a group activity. We may visit a new elevated state by grace. Yeah, it's all about grace. But we cannot stay there in a state of grace under our own power. Willpower alone is insufficient to maintain good behavior. That's why we have to be in church together. That's why you have to be in a community together. You can't be enlightened alone, you can't be a Christian alone, you can't be a human being alone, and you cannot have a democracy alone. Can I hear an amen? Amen. Thank you. So in my sermon, I talked about Pando. If you come at 11:15, you'll hear about Pando. It is 106 acres of one quaking aspen. All those separate trunks are not individual separate trees. The DNA test has been done on them. They are all one plant. They have the exact same DNA. The reason I put the right picture up is just to show you how stunningly gorgeous they are. They self-prune and they leave what looks like eyes. And indigenous people say that they teach their young men and women who are going out to understand that those eyes are looking at them, to seeing if they're being humane in their hunting practices, etc. And the left-hand picture shows you a state road in southern Utah that runs through the middle of Pando. This root ball is underneath a state road. durable. And it's all one plant. It's the largest, oldest, they think probably 13,000 years old. All came from one seed, which of course is the case with all of us. Everything that is, came from one seed 13.8 billion years ago in the Big Bang. So, it's very easy to experience that I am you when you're in the middle of this grove of quaking aspen. So, this slide is kind of out of order, but I'm just trying to call us back to the fact that I am claiming that there's a fear-based understanding for everything and there's a love-based understanding for everything. And last week when we were talking about baptism, I talked, and you can't read that, that's why if you want to check me out, you can have me send these to you. My email is ed@stlukechurch.org. There's a fear-based understanding of baptism. Sir? Thank you very much. Like I said, it's ed@stlukes.atlanta.org. Thank you. So, don't stop doing that, Horace. Don't stop correcting me. So, there's a fear-based understanding of baptism, which is that's the ticket you get punched to keep you from going to hell and get you into heaven. There's a fear-based understanding of salvation, that it's an individual, one-time choice to save you from burning in hell forever. There's a love-based understanding of baptism, and that is baptism is a sacrament of your belovedness and everybody else's belovedness. And there's a love-based understanding of salvation is discovering your true self within community, in community, and on a journey. And you are saved in the New Testament. Now brace for this. The you, Y-O-U, is always in the original plural. You, it says, are being saved. It's not you are saved. You are in the process of being saved. That's why you and I are being saved right this second. And it's about wholeness. Saved can be translated whole, so you are being made whole. Now, by the way, this is a wonderful photo of a great forensic artist's rendering of what Jesus probably looked like, with features typical of a Middle Eastern Jew in the Galilee area of northern Israel. Oneness was huge for Jesus. Somebody asked him once what was the best commandment, and he said, love the Lord with all your being, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. Now we're going to come back to what that means, neighbor as yourself. It's about oneness. Then he also, in John, left off the capital J, prayed to Jesus, the high priestly prayer, so it's called. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, as you and you are in me, and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory you've given me, I've given to them, so that they may be one as we are one, I in them, you in me, that they may become completely one. That's about become awareness of the oneness already in them, so that the world may know that you have sent me and I loved them even as you've loved me. Now, I lost my quote on Ram Dass, but I will find it before I send this out. Ram Dass has a great saying about oneness, and I couldn't find it. I'm moving, and I'm in transition, so I'll find it. Anyway, in St. Paul, in 1 Corinthians 12, he talks about us. We are like a body, and there are many members and many organs, and we can't do without any of them. And you certainly wouldn't, as a liver, say to an ear, get out of here, I have no need of you. Don't like the way you smell. So all of us are the body of Christ. Now for Paul, Christ was not only in Jesus. I would argue that for the whole New Testament, Christ is not only in Jesus, Christ is in all of us. According to John 1, When we were all created, we were created through the Christ, or the Word, or love. And that is a vibrating fingerprint inside every one of us. We all have the Christ in us. Your real last name is Christ, just like Jesus' last name is Christ. That was not the last name of his mom and daddy. That is who we are. And we are all one, but we're very different. Now, you're the body of Christ and individually members of it. It's a great thing to pray through. And then our brother, Richard Rohr, and an orbit with him, you'll see some of their faces in just a second. All these folks are paying attention to quantum physics and saying, it's time for us to be friends with science instead of excommunicating the Copernicuses and the Galileos in our midst. And let's hear what the quantum physicists are saying. So he says, we used to believe that reality was comprised of little separate elemental building blocks, but now we realize that nothing exists in isolation. Rather, as scientists like Franciscan Sister Ilia Delio point out, everything exists as one interconnected whole. What time is it in the day of our Lord? Oh, good. So here is Ilia Delio. So she is one of my favorite theologians. You're going to be hearing a lot about her in my sermons. She is a professor at Villanova. Her headquarters is in Washington, D.C. She's a Roman Catholic sister in the Franciscan order. And she came in as a very rigid, conservative sister with a habit on and all that kind of stuff. She had gotten a PhD in pharmacology, a real arcane subset of pharmacology, and was a sister already, and also wanted more theology, got a PhD in the history of theology. Started reading Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit priest who died, I think, at 45 or something like that, who was a paleontologist. So here's her resonance with a scientist, a mystic, a theologian. And she started saying, we've got a lot to learn from science, we Christians. And so she writes, quantum physics is based on the primacy of energy. Somebody wrote me a note and said, thank you, Ed, for talking about the fact that these pews are energy. You know, Brother Einstein said, E equal mc squared. Now, you can't get up and explain all that right now, Richard. I know you know it, but we're not going to. But it is to say that matter, which is the M in that, is equivalent to energy. And so everything that we call matter is also energy. And we're not these automatons going around. We're actually inside of us. We have events going on inside of us with all these protons and all these things that are inside of us. Y'all know about that. Subatomic particle. I am a walking event. And you are a walking event. We are not separate from one another. And the interconnectedness of all that exists is what quantum physics is about too. And she says, being is intrinsically relational, and all that is exists as unbroken wholeness. Each part is connected with every other part. We are fundamentally wholes within wholes. Okay, let that resonate with what St. Paul says about salvation. Salvation is being made whole, or to realize the wholeness that is walking inside of you. The active, alive, electric, energized, energetic whole within you. So she says the notion that all these fragments are separately existent is evidently an illusion. And this illusion cannot do other than lead to endless conflict and confusion. Which is Charles Eisenstein saying, if you live with the ideology of the myth of the separate self, you're going to be in constant competition and conflict with other people and confused about life. Indeed, the attempt to live according to the notion that the fragments are really separate is in essence what has led to, click them off, pollution, destruction of the balance of nature, overpopulation, worldwide economic and political disorder, and the creation of an overall environment that is neither physically nor mentally healthy. And, we could add, racism, misogyny, heteronormativity, bigotry, poverty, on and on, all come out of understanding not understanding that we are one. So there are certain people who take this and have created a word. It's very important to create new language as we understand the immensity of life. And one of them is interbeing. None of us is a being. We are all interbeing. We are being intertwined with one another. Now, going back to 1945, Eddie Hillesum, a mystic, young Jewish woman who died in a World War II Nazi concentration camp in 1943, wrote from prison about how prayer was working on her and how her mind became centered on love and divine presence in a concentration camp. And she was realizing her deep connectivity to others. And here's the quote: "Each of us moves things along in the direction of war every time we fail in love." Now let's just stop right there. Y'all taking that in? We move things along in the direction of war every time we fail in love. Now, she doesn't go on to say every time we ask for forgiveness, we act in compassion, empathy, we rewind and go back toward peace, right? All disasters stem from us. Why is there war? Perhaps because now and then I might be inclined to snap at my neighbor because I and my neighbor and everyone else do not have enough love. Yet there is love bound up inside us. Now, she's saying this is a Jew, but that's Christ she's talking about. When you believe that there's love bound up in every human being, you're pointing to the Christ that is in every human being. And one day we'll talk about how the Christ and that love is in every leaf and lizard as well, because New Testament says God is all and is in all. We can't go there today. And if we could release that love that's bound up inside us into the world a little each day, we would be fighting war and everything that comes with war. So Ilia Delio comments on that. She says, Eddie's deep insights resonate with what scientists have discovered, that local changes have global effects because we are deeply connected by fields of energy. Our thoughts as well as our actions impact one another, even if we are spatially separated, because in our cosmic roots, we are deeply entwined. She says she's taking that from physics understanding of quantum entanglements. If you have a subatomic particle next to one another, and then you take one somehow and split it and send it over to China, and these subatomic particles are twirling, and you get one to start twirling the other direction, the one in China will start twirling the other direction. That's why I always, when I think about somebody, I call them on the phone. I said, okay, God told me to call you. And 8 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, thank God you called me. I'm in the hospital. We are entangled with one another, and we need to pay attention to when we have this little nudge to call one another. Cynthia Bourgeault is just so wonderful. And my favorite book of hers is The Heart of Centering Prayer, where she says that the whole notion of contemplation is to get to the place of oneness inside yourself, realizing that you're one with yourself and with everybody else and with God, and that when you leave your moment of contemplation and go out, after you've attained that realization, it's an awareness that all is one, then you see oneness because you are seeing from oneness. Now, she loves to comment on Jesus, and I really applaud what she says. She says, when Jesus talks about oneness, John 17, he's not speaking in an Eastern sense about an equivalency of being such that I am in and of myself divine. I'm not divine apart from you or apart from God. All of us are divine in God, and God in us. Rather, what Jesus has in mind is a complete mutual indwelling. I am in God, God is in you, you are in God, we are in each other. And then, commenting on John 15, where I am the vine, you are the branches, Jesus says, she says, we flow into God and God into us. Just imagine the sap that's in that vine going into those leaves and those grapes. Because it is the nature of love to flow. Actually, the sap that is flowing in you and me and everybody else, that sap is called love. And as we give ourselves into one another in this fashion, the vine gives life and coherence to the branch, while the branch makes visible what the vine is. The whole and the part live together in mutual, loving reciprocity, each belonging to the other and dependent on the other to show forth the fullness of love. That's Jesus' vision of no separation between human and divine. There's no separation between humans and God because of this mutual interabiding, which expresses the indivisible reality of divine love, because all love is energy. It's sap, it's electricity, it's flowing in you and between us right now and between absolutely everybody in Atlanta and everybody in the cosmos. So central to Jesus' teaching is love your neighbor as yourself. Remember? Great commandment. Love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. Well, all of us, I think, at one point, except the mystics here, they're really, really mystical people, have always thought, well, I've got to love myself a whole bunch. And then, with what I have left over, then I'm going to use that to love other people. So I'm going to love other people as myself, but I've got to get into some real good love myself first, right? So she says, we almost hear all of this wrong. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And of course, the next logical question becomes, but I have to love me first, don't I, before I can love my neighbor? But she says, if you listen closely to Jesus, however, there's no as much as in his admonition. It's just love your neighbor as yourself, as a continuation of your own very being. It's a complete seeing that your neighbor is you. And we're not talking about zip codes here. Neighbor. The person who's in need is your neighbor. It's a complete seeing that your neighbor is you. There are not two individuals out there, one seeking to better herself at the price of the other or to extend charity to the other. There are simply two cells of the one great life. So I put a homeless person and some refugees there. So this is my last thing. I'm rethinking Christianity, and central to it is re-articulating a Christianity of love, not an ideology of fear or rewards and punishments. Oneness over separateness, and Christianity, not churchianity, because churchianity has been bigoted and white supremacist and heteronormative and patriarchal, and has said that certain people are worth more than others. So I'm so happy to be here to kind of work on that with you and have your critiques and your encouragement. And if you want a copy of any of this stuff, I'll send it to you if you'll send me your critiques. Thank you very much.